At the airport parking lot, I found my son sleeping in his car with his twins huddled under a dirty blanket. I banged on the window and asked, "Where is the $150,000 I invested in your startup?" He broke down and told me his wife and her family took everything and claimed he was mentally unstable. I felt a rage I hadn't felt in 30 years and said, "Pack your things, we are fixing this right now." Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up for your family against people who thought they could destroy you. My name is Garrison Ford, and I am 69 years old. I spent 40 years pouring concrete and framing houses in the rain and mud of the Pacific Northwest. I built half the suburbs south of Seattle with my own two hands and a crew of men who knew better than to cross me. I retired 5 years ago with a bad back, a portfolio of paid-off rental properties, and a reputation for being a man you do not want to owe money to. I thought I was done fighting. I thought the rest of my life would be salmon fishing in Alaska and watching my grandsons play baseball. I was wrong. The war was just starting, and it was waiting for me. In the long-term parking garage at Sea-Tac International Airport. I had just landed after 2 weeks off the grid in Ketchikan. My cooler was full of frozen coho salmon, and I was ready to get back to my quiet, orderly life. I walked to Section C of the parking garage, dragging my gear, looking for my truck. That is when I saw it. It was a black SUV tucked away in the darkest corner of the row, right next to a concrete pillar. It wasn't just parked. It was hiding. Newspapers were taped up over the rear windows from the inside. A sunshade blocked the windshield even though we were underground. I knew that car. I helped pay the down payment on it 3 years ago. It was my son Brandon's car. My heart skipped a beat, but not out of fear. It was confusion. Brandon was supposed to be in his home office, coding the next big app, living the suburban dream I had bankrolled. I walked over slowly. The air around the vehicle smelled stale. It smelled like misery. I raised my fist and hammered on the driver's side window. The sound echoed through the empty concrete garage like a gunshot. The sunshade shifted. A face appeared in the gap. It took me a second to recognize my own flesh and blood. Brandon looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His beard was patchy and overgrown. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, surrounded by dark circles that looked like bruises. He cracked the window an inch. The smell hit me instantly. It was the smell of unwashed bodies, stale fast food, and despair. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was a dry rasp. "Open the door," I commanded. I didn't ask. I didn't suggest. I used the voice I used to use on job sites when a subcontractor tried to cut corners. He unlocked it. I ripped the door open. The interior of the luxury car was a landfill. Wrapper from cheap burgers, empty water bottles, and dirty laundry were piled on the passenger seat. But my eyes went straight to the back. My grandsons Leo and Max were curled up together on the leather bench seat, tangled in a sleeping bag that looked too thin for the November chill. They were 5 years old. They should have been in kindergarten. They should have been playing with Legos in a warm room. Instead, they were sleeping in a parking garage like refugees. I looked back at Brandon. He was shivering even though he was wearing 2 hoodies. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at his hands, which were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I did not hug him. I did not ask him if he was okay. Hugs don't fix problems. Facts fix problems. I leaned in, putting my face inches from his. "Where is the money, Brandon?" He flinched. "I gave you $150,000. 6 months ago," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "It was seed money for your software company. It was supposed to secure your future. Why are my grandsons sleeping in a car in a parking garage?" He started to shake. A sob ripped out of his throat, a jagged, ugly sound. "It's gone, Dad. It's all gone." I felt a vein in my forehead start to throb. Explain. Now. Vanessa, he whispered. The name hung in the damp air between us. Vanessa, his wife, my daughter-in-law. The woman who posted photos of her perfect organic meals and her perfect yoga poses on social media every single day. The woman who smiled at me at Thanksgiving and asked if I had considered updating my will. She kicked me out, Brandon said, the words spilling out like vomit. 3 days ago, I came home from a meeting and the locks were changed. Her parents' car was in the driveway. When I tried to use my key, the alarm went off. I stared at him. You own that house, Brandon. Your name is on the deed. I made sure of it. Not anymore, he said, tears finally spilling over and tracking through the grime on his face. She filed for an emergency restraining order. She told the judge I was unstable. She told them I was a danger to the boys. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Unstable. My son was the gentlest man I knew. Too gentle. That was his problem. He was a soft-hearted engineer who thought the world played by the rules. He didn't have my calluses. And the money I asked. The startup capital. She moved it, he said. She convinced me to put it into a trust for the boys' education last month. She said it was for tax purposes. She said her mother had a financial advisor who could triple it. I signed the transfer papers. And let me guess, I said, the ice in my voice dropping the temperature in the garage by 10 degrees. Her mother is the trustee. He nodded miserably. She froze the joint accounts, Dad. She canceled my credit cards. She told the police I was having a psychotic break and that I threatened to burn the house down. They gave me 5 minutes to grab some clothes and the boys and leave. She didn't even want the boys' dad. She said she needed space to process her trauma. She kept the house. She kept the dog. She gave me the kids and told me to get out before she had me arrested. I looked at my grandsons sleeping in the back. They looked thin. Their clothes were wrinkled. They were victims of a woman who viewed family as a business transaction, and my son as a stepping stone she was done stepping on. This wasn't a marriage dispute. This was a demolition. And Vanessa Whitmore had made a fatal calculation. She thought she was just breaking her husband. She forgot that her husband had a father who used to break concrete for a living. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys to my Ford F-150. I grabbed Brandon's shoulder. His collarbone felt sharp under my hand. He had lost weight. Get out of the car, I said. He looked at me confused. What? Get the boys. Get your essentials. Leave this trash can here. You are taking my truck. You are going to my house. The key is under the mat in the garage, same place it has been for 20 years. There is a pot of stew in the freezer. Thaw it. Feed my grandsons. Then take a shower. Shave that face. You look like a victim, and no son of mine is going to be a victim. Brandon stumbled out of the SUV. He looked like he was about to collapse. Dad, what are you going to do? I tossed him my keys. He caught them with fumbling hands. I am going to take your car, I said. I am going to drive to your house, and I am going to have a very long, very loud conversation with your wife. He grabbed my arm. His grip was weak. Dad, no. You can't. She has the police on speed dial. Her parents are there, Richard and Diane. They are lying to everyone. They will say you are attacking them. You will go to jail. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile I used when a building inspector tried to solicit a bribe. Let them call the police, I said. I want them to call the police. I want everything on the record from this moment forward. I opened the back door and gently woke up Leo and Max. They looked at me with sleepy, confused eyes. Grandpa Max whispered, "Are we going camping again?" My heart broke and then it hardened into stone. "No, buddy," I said softly. "You are going to Grandpa's house. You are going to sleep in a real bed tonight." Your dad is going to take you." I helped them transfer their small backpacks into my truck. I watched Brandon buckle them in. He looked at me one last time, fear and gratitude warring in his eyes. "We have nothing, Dad," he said. "She took everything." "You have me," I said, "and that is more than she can handle. Go." I watched my truck tail lights disappear up the ramp. Then I turned back to the black SUV. I climbed into the driver's seat. It smelled of failure. I adjusted the mirrors. I ripped the newspapers off the back windows. I started the engine. I had a 30-minute drive to the suburbs, 30 minutes to plan. Vanessa thought she had won. She thought she had stripped Brandon of his resources, his dignity, and his sanity. She thought she was playing chess against a man who didn't know the rules. But she wasn't playing against Brandon anymore. She was playing against Garrison Ford. And I don't play chess. I play demolition derby. I pulled out of the airport parking lot and merged onto the highway. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang twice. "Vargas," I said when the line opened. Garrison, the voice on the other end, was smooth, sharp, and expensive. "I thought you were retired." "I was," I said, watching the skyline of Seattle pass by. "But I have a situation. I need you to open a file." "Real estate?" Vargas asked. "No," I said. "Pest control. I have a rat problem in my son's house. I need you to find out everything you can about the Whitmore family. Richard, Diane, and their daughter Vanessa. I want bank accounts, credit scores, liens, debts, and dirty laundry. I want to know what they had for breakfast and who they owe money to." There was a pause on the line. Then the sound of a keyboard clacking. "This sounds expensive, Garrison." "It is going to be very expensive," I said. "For them. I am heading to the house now. I am going to make a scene. I need you to be ready to bail me out if necessary." "Consider it done," Vargas said. "Welcome back to the game." I hung up. I pressed the accelerator. The speedometer climbed. I was coming for them, and I wasn't going to knock. I drove my son's black SUV through the winding streets of the upscale suburb I had helped zone 20 years ago. The engine hummed with a quiet power that mocked the situation. This was a vehicle for a successful man, a family man, not a man sleeping in a parking garage with his children. The leather steering wheel was sticky with grime from my son's anxious hands, a tactile reminder of the hell he had been living in. I gripped it tighter, turning my knuckles white. I pulled into the driveway of the house at 420 Cedar Lane. It was a sprawling craftsman-style home with a manicured lawn and a porch that wrapped around the front. It was the kind of house that screamed stability. It was the kind of house that cost $800,000. I knew that figure intimately because I had written the check for the down payment. $80,000 of my retirement money handed over with a smile because I thought I was investing in my grandchildren's future. Now looking at the perfectly trimmed hedges and the solar path lights, I realized I had just paid for the stage where my son's execution had taken place. I put the car in park but left the engine running. I stared at the driveway. There was a silver Lexus parked right in the center, blocking the path to the garage. It had a personalized license plate that read, "Richard Whitmore, my son's father-in-law." The man who claimed to be a retired investment banker but never seemed to pick up a check at dinner. He was here. They were all here. They were probably sitting in the living room I had painted, drinking wine and congratulating themselves on a job well done. I got out of the SUV. The evening air was cool and smelled of rain and cedar. It was a peaceful night in a peaceful neighborhood, but I brought a storm with me. I walked to the trunk of my son's car. It was filled with trash, but tucked in the side well I found what I was looking for. A framing hammer. It was old, the steel handle wrapped in worn leather, heavy and cold in my hand. It was a tool for building, but tonight it was a tool for entry. I walked up the concrete path to the front door. I didn't look at the Ring doorbell camera. I knew it was recording. I didn't care. I reached the solid oak door, another upgrade I had paid for. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course. I looked at the keypad above the handle. It was a smart lock, one of those high-tech gadgets Vanessa insisted on. She said it was for security. Now I knew who she was securing the house against. It wasn't burglars. It was her husband. I didn't ring the bell. Doorbells are for guests. I wasn't a guest. I was the bank, and the bank was foreclosing. I swung the hammer. The sound of steel hitting reinforced plastic cracked through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. The smart lock shattered. Sparks flew as the battery pack dislodged. I swung again, harder this time, driving the deadbolt mechanism backward through the frame. The wood splintered. It was a satisfying crunching sound. I kicked the door right below the lock plate. It swung open, bouncing off the interior wall with a thud. I stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of lavender and expensive candles. It smelled clean. It was a stark, violent contrast to the stench of the car I had just left my grandsons in. "Garrison!" A voice shrieked from the top of the stairs. I looked up. Vanessa stood on the landing. She was wearing a silk robe, and her hair was wrapped in a towel as if she had just stepped out of a spa treatment. In her hand, she held her phone pointed directly at me. The flash was on. I walked further into the house, my boots leaving mud on the pristine white runner rug. "Where is he?" I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Where is the man who is driving my car?" Vanessa didn't retreat. She didn't look scared. She looked excited. She held the phone steady, framing the shot. "You are live, Garrison," she said, her voice dropping into a theatrical, trembling register. "Everyone can see you. You broke into my house. You are armed." "I am not armed," I said, tossing the hammer onto the entryway table. It landed with a heavy clatter, cracking a ceramic vase. "I am here to inspect my investment." "Get out!" she screamed, ramping up the volume for her audience. "You are crazy. You are just like Brandon, violent and unstable. I have a restraining order." "That order is for your husband," I said, taking a step toward the stairs. "Not for me." Suddenly, the door to the kitchen swung open. Richard and Diane Whitmore stepped out. Richard was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a glass of scotch. Diane was in yoga pants, looking bored. They didn't look like people who were afraid of an intruder. They looked like people who were annoyed that their evening was interrupted. "You need to leave, Garrison," Richard said, swirling his drink. "The police are already on their way. We hit the silent alarm as soon as we saw your truck." I looked at Richard. I looked at his soft hands and his smug face. "I am not leaving," I said, "not until I see the garage." Richard stiffened. His eyes darted to the door leading to the attached garage. "Why do you want to see the garage, Garrison?" "Because I paid for it," I said. I didn't wait for permission. I walked past them. Richard tried to step in front of me, putting a hand on my chest. I didn't hit him. I just walked through him. I spent 40 years moving heavy beams. A man made of soft dough and scotch was not an obstacle. I shoved him aside with my shoulder, sending him stumbling into the wall. He spilled his drink. "Assault," he yelled. "That is assault." I reached the garage door and yanked it open. The automatic lights flickered on. The space was immense, a 3-car layout I had helped design. And there it was. Parked next to Vanessa's white Range Rover was a brand new BMW 7 Series. It was jet black, polished to a mirror shine. It still had the temporary dealer tags in the window. I walked up to it. It smelled of new leather and arrogance. I looked through the windshield at the temporary registration taped to the glass. Owner Richard Whitmore. Date of purchase 3 days ago. I felt a cold fire ignite in my gut. 3 days ago. The exact same day Brandon was kicked out. The exact same day the $150,000 vanished from the startup account. I turned around. Richard was standing in the doorway, adjusting his sweater. He wasn't embarrassed. He was defiant. "Nice car, Richard," I said. "Did you trade in your soul for it, or did you just use my son's future?" Richard laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "It is a retirement gift to myself, Garrison. You wouldn't understand. You worked for your money. Some of us are smart enough to let money work for us." "You stole it," I said. "You stole it from your own grandchildren. They are sleeping in a car, Richard. Your grandsons are sleeping in a car while you park this thing in a heated garage." "That is Brandon's fault," Vanessa chimed in, coming down the stairs, phone still recording. "If he was a better provider, he wouldn't be homeless. We are just protecting the assets from his mania." Blue and red lights flashed through the front window. Sirens wailed, cutting through the heavy tension in the room. The cavalry had arrived. I looked at the three of them, a family of vampires. They stood together, united by greed and a total lack of conscience. They thought the police were their shield. They thought the law was a tool they could weaponize against honest men. Two officers burst through the front door, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," one shouted. I raised my empty hands slowly. "I already dropped it," I said, nodding toward the table. "I am unarmed. I am just a grandfather." The officers rushed in, securing the scene. They patted me down, spinning me around and pushing me against the wall. I didn't resist. I let them do their job. I knew the drill. "He broke in," Vanessa sobbed, turning the camera toward the police. "He smashed the door. He shoved my father. He is having a psychotic break. Please, you have to arrest him." The officer, a young man who looked like he played linebacker in high school, turned me around. "Sir, is this true? Did you break down the door?" "I did," I said calmly. "I feared for the safety of the occupants. I thought I smelled gas." Richard snorted. "He is lying. He is crazy. You should put him in the same cell as his son. They both belong in a mental institution. He threatened to burn the house down." I looked the officer in the eye. "I didn't threaten anyone. I came to ask about my grandchildren's trust fund, and I found that BMW in the garage. Ask him where he got the money for it, officer. Ask him to show you the bank transfer." The officer looked confused. "Sir, this is a civil matter, but you cannot break into houses. You are trespassing." The older officer, a sergeant with gray hair, stepped forward. He looked at the shattered door. He looked at Vanessa's phone, which was still broadcasting. He looked at Richard's spilled scotch. "Mr. Ford," the sergeant said, "I know who you are. You built the precinct station downtown." I nodded. I did. Good foundation on that building. The sergeant sighed. "Look, you can't be here. You definitely can't be breaking doors. These folks want to press charges for destruction of property and assault." "Let them," I said. "I will pay for the door. I have plenty of money. Unlike them." Richard stepped forward, his face red. "I want him arrested. He is dangerous." The sergeant held up a hand. "We are issuing a trespass warning tonight. Mr. Ford is leaving. If he comes back, he goes to jail. Is that clear?" Vanessa shrieked. "That is it. He attacked us. He pushed you, ma'am," the sergeant asked. "No, he pushed my father." "Did he punch you, sir?" the sergeant asked Richard. "He shoved me." The sergeant looked at me. I was nearly 70 years old. I stood straight, hands at my sides. "It is a he said, she said situation regarding the push," the sergeant said. "But the breaking and entering is real. Mr. Ford, you are leaving with us. You are not to come within 500 feet of this property or these people. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. I walked out of the house flanked by the officers. I didn't look back at Vanessa or her parents. I didn't need to. I had seen everything I needed to see. I had seen the fear in their eyes when I walked past them. I had seen the new car bought with stolen money. I had confirmed that they were not just cruel, they were careless. They were arrogant. They thought buying a luxury car 3 days after a theft was smart. They thought live streaming a confrontation would garner sympathy. They didn't realize they were documenting their own crimes. Vanessa's video would show me calm. It would show me unarmed. It would show Richard admitting he bought the car. It would show the timeline. As I sat in the back of the patrol car, the hard plastic seat digging into my back, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, burning hot and bright, but now it had a direction. It wasn't just rage anymore. It was fuel. They wanted a war. They wanted to use the legal system to crush my son. They wanted to paint us as violent, unstable men who needed to be locked away so they could spend our money in peace. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The officer hadn't taken it. I wasn't under arrest, just being escorted off the premises. I opened my messages and found Vargas. I typed with my thumbs, my movements precise and deliberate. They have the money. It is in hard assets. They bought a BMW with the startup capital. They are claiming insanity for Brandon and now for me. Activate Protocol B. I want a full forensic audit of Richard and Diane Whitmore. I want to know every debt, every loan, every lien. And Vargas find out who holds the mortgage on the house at 420 Cedar Lane. I hit send. The police car pulled away from the curb. I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. It looked like a fortress, but I knew better. I knew how houses were built. I knew that if the foundation was rotten, it didn't matter how pretty the paint was. The whole thing would come down, and I was going to be the one to pull the first brick. I walked into my kitchen, and the smell of slow-cooked beef and carrots hit me like a physical memory of a better life. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of a home that hadn't been invaded by monsters. My house was a fortress of cedar and stone that I had built on a 3-acre lot overlooking the Sound. It was solid. It was paid for. And tonight, it was a refugee camp. Brandon was sitting at the kitchen island. He had followed my orders. He was showered. He had shaved off the scraggly beard that made him look like a derelict. He was wearing an old flannel shirt of mine that hung loose on his frame. He looked clean, but he didn't look right. He looked like a ghost haunting his own body. His hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just staring into the dark liquid, as if he expected a shark to swim up out of the ceramic. The boys Leo and Max were asleep in the guest room. I had checked on them 3 times since I walked in the door. They were sprawled out on the queen-sized bed, clean and full of stew, sleeping the heavy, exhausted sleep of children who had finally stopped being afraid. Seeing them safe lowered my blood pressure a few points, but seeing my son raised it right back up. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. I didn't push him immediately. I let the silence stretch. I needed him to come back to reality on his own terms. The police encounter at his house had shaken me not because I was afraid of the law, but because I had seen the absolute confidence in the eyes of the Whitmore family. They weren't acting like criminals on the run. They were acting like owners who had just evicted a squatter. Brandon pushed the coffee mug away. The ceramic scraped loudly against the granite counter. "I can't drink it," he whispered. I looked at the mug. "It is decaf, Brandon. I made it myself." "I know," he said, his voice trembling. "But I can't. Every time I smell coffee now, I feel sick. I feel like the room is tilting." I walked over and sat on the stool next to him. "Tell me," I said. "Start from the beginning. Not the money, not the house. Tell me about the room tilting." He looked at me and his eyes were full of a terrified clarity. "It started about 2 years ago, Dad. Right after the twins turned 3. Vanessa started insisting on making my morning coffee. She said she bought a special blend. She said I was working too hard on the startup code, and I needed focus." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I would drink it, and 30 minutes later, the fog would roll in. I would lose time, Dad. I would sit at my computer to write code, and 3 hours would pass, and I would have typed nothing. I would forget conversations. I would forget where I put my keys. I would forget to pick up the dry cleaning. I listened, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Go on. She was so sweet about it at first, he continued. She would find my keys in the refrigerator. She would find my wallet in the trash can. She would look at me with these big, worried eyes and ask if I was okay. She started making appointments for me. Not with real doctors. With holistic specialists she knew. They told me I had adrenal fatigue. They told me I had early onset cognitive decline. They gave me supplements. Supplements, I repeated. Did you take them? Vanessa gave them to me, he said, every night with dinner. She crushed them into my food because she said they absorbed better. After dinner, I would get aggressive, or I would cry. I don't remember doing it, Dad. I really don't. But the next morning, she would show me the videos, my hands clenched on the countertop. Videos. She recorded me, he said, tears welling up again. She would show me videos on her phone. In the video, I would be screaming at the wall, or I would be crying on the floor curled up in a ball. I looked insane, Dad. I looked like a maniac. She told me I was scaring the boys. She told me I was becoming dangerous. She said if I didn't do exactly what she said, she would have to call 911. I believed her. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was broken. I looked at my son. I saw the engineer who had graduated with honors. I saw the man who could calculate structural loads in his head. They had chemically lobotomized him. They had poisoned him slowly, day by day, cup by cup, turning his own biochemistry against him. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a systematic dismantling of a human being. It wasn't adrenal fatigue, Brandon, I said, my voice low and hard. It was sedation. She was drugging you. He nodded slowly. I found the bottle a week ago. I came home early. She was in the kitchen. She had a mortar and pestle. She was grinding up white pills. When she saw me, she swept them into the sink. But I saw the bottle on the counter before she grabbed it. It was prescription antipsychotics, high dose. The name on the bottle wasn't hers. It was her mother's. Diane Whitmore. I closed my eyes for a second, putting the pieces together. Diane got the pills. Vanessa administered them. They created the symptoms. They filmed the reaction. They built a library of evidence proving my son was unstable. It was a long con, a 2-year demolition project. And the money I asked, opening my eyes. The $150,000, the startup capital. How did they get that? Brandon looked down at his hands. I was scared, Dad. I was so scared. I thought I was going to be institutionalized. Vanessa told me that if I was declared incompetent, the state would take the business. She said the only way to protect the boys' future was to move the assets. She brought me the papers on a bad day. A day when the fog was so thick I couldn't read the fine print. She said it was a tax shelter, a trust for Leo and Max. He looked up at me, shame burning in his cheeks. I signed it, Dad. I signed it all away. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was protecting them. But it wasn't a trust for the boys. Who is the trustee, Brandon? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Diane, he whispered. Diane Whitmore has sole signatory power. It is an irrevocable trust. Vanessa told me yesterday, right before she called the police. She laughed at me. She said, "You gave my mother your retirement, Brandon, and you thanked her for taking it." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark waters of the Sound. I needed to look at something vast and cold to cool the fire in my chest. If I didn't, I was going to drive back to Cedar Lane and burn that house to the ground with them inside. $150,000. That was the visible tip of the iceberg. They had the house. They had his savings. They had his dignity. And now they had his medical history fabricated by poison and lies. My phone rang. It was sitting on the island, buzzing angrily against the granite. I walked over and looked at the screen. It was Vargas. It was 11 o'clock at night. Vargas didn't call at 11 o'clock unless the building was collapsing. I picked it up. "Talk to me," Garrison Vargas said. His voice was tight. He wasn't using his smooth lawyer voice. He was using his combat voice. "We have a problem. A big one." I put it on speaker so Brandon could hear. "What kind of problem?" "I just got an alert from the court filing system," Vargas said. "Vanessa's legal team just filed an emergency ex parte motion. It was time-stamped at 4:59 p.m. today, 1 minute before the court closed. Motion for what I asked. Conservatorship," Vargas said. "Not just a restraining order, not just temporary custody. She is filing for full permanent conservatorship over Brandon Ford. She is claiming he is suffering from severe rapid-onset schizophrenia and is a danger to himself and others. She is asking for control over his person, his medical decisions, and his remaining financial assets." Brandon let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Garrison Vargas continued speaking fast. "They attached exhibits, dozens of them. They have videos, Garrison. Videos of Brandon screaming. Videos of him breaking dishes. They have affidavits from her parents claiming he attacked them. They have a letter from a holistic doctor stating he has shown signs of psychotic breaks for 2 years. I looked at Brandon. He was shaking his head violently. "I didn't attack them. I broke a plate because I was frustrated. I was confused." "It doesn't matter what the truth is right now," Vargas said. "It matters what the judge sees. This is an emergency filing. That means there is a hearing in 48 hours. Thursday morning. If the judge grants this, Brandon loses everything. He loses the right to hire a lawyer. He loses the right to control his own money. He loses the right to see his children. He becomes a ward of his wife. She will have the legal power to commit him to a facility." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. "This is the Britney Spears playbook," I said softly. "Exactly," Vargas said. "It is the nuclear option. If she gets this, she doesn't just get the money. She gets to bury the witness. She gets to lock Brandon away in a facility where no one will listen to him because he is the crazy husband, and she gets to pay for it with his own money." I looked at my son. He looked like a man who had just been told he had terminal cancer. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly the way they wanted him to look. But they forgot one thing. They forgot he wasn't alone. I slammed my hand down on the granite countertop. The sound was like a thunderclap in the quiet kitchen. Brandon jumped. "Enough!" I roared. I grabbed the phone. "Vargas, listen to me." "I am listening," Vargas said. "She wants to play the Britney Spears card." I said, my voice shaking with a cold, controlled rage. "She wants to use the system to enslave my son." "Fine. We are going to show her what the system really looks like when it comes after you." "What do you want me to do?" Vargas asked. "I want you to find the best forensic psychiatrist on the West Coast," I said. "I don't care what they cost. I want someone who can testify in the Supreme Court. I want them here tomorrow morning. I want a full evaluation of Brandon. I want hair follicle testing. I want blood work. I want to prove there are drugs in his system that he didn't prescribe himself." "Done," Vargas said. "I know a guy in San Francisco. I will fly him up." And Vargas, I continued, "I want a private investigator, not a guy who takes pictures of cheating spouses. I want a forensic accountant. I want someone who specializes in fraud. I want someone who can find a dime in a sewer." "I have just the team," Vargas said. "Get them," I said. "We have 48 hours. I want to know where every penny of that $150,000 went." I want to know who owns the trust. I want to know if Diane Whitmore has ever been sued for fraud before. She has a record, Vargas said. I already ran a preliminary check. She has 2 bankruptcies and a settled lawsuit regarding an insurance claim in Arizona 10 years ago. I smiled. It was a grim, shark-like smile. Arizona. Good. Get the files, I said. We are going to walk into that courtroom on Thursday, and we are going to drop a bomb. They think they are putting Brandon on trial. No. We are putting them on trial. Dad, Brandon whispered. He was looking at me with wide eyes. Can we win? They have the videos. I looked at him. I reached out and put my heavy, calloused hand on his shoulder. Son, I said. They have videos of a man who was drugged. We are going to have science. We are going to have the money trail. And we are going to have me. I turned back to the phone. Vargas, draft a counter motion. We are filing for emergency custody of the twins based on child endangerment. On what grounds? Vargas asked. On the grounds that their mother is a drug dealer who poisons family members, I said. And on the grounds that she abandoned them in a parking lot with a homeless man. I can work with that, Vargas said. I will see you at your house at 7:00 a.m. Get some sleep, Garrison. You're going to need it. I hung up the phone. I looked at Brandon. Go to bed, I said. He shook his head. I can't sleep. I am terrified. You are going to sleep, I said firmly. Because tomorrow you aren't the victim anymore. Tomorrow you are the star witness. And I need you sharp. I am going to make you a sandwich. You are going to eat it. And then you are going to sleep. I will sit in the hall. I have my shotgun. No one is coming through that door. Brandon looked at me. For the first time in 2 years, the fog in his eyes seemed to clear just a fraction. He saw his father. Not the retired old man who went fishing. He saw the man who built skyscrapers. Okay, Dad, he said. Okay. I watched him eat. I watched him walk to the bedroom. I checked the locks on the doors. I turned off the lights. I sat in the armchair in the hallway, the shotgun resting across my knees. Vanessa and her family wanted a conservatorship. They wanted control. They wanted to erase my son. They had made a fatal error. They thought they were fighting a software engineer. They didn't realize they had just declared war on a man who had spent 40 years turning raw earth into stone. I stared into the dark. 48 hours. That was all the time I had to save my son's life. I wasn't going to waste a second of it. I pulled out my tablet and started searching for property records in Arizona. Diane Whitmore. Let's see what you are hiding in the desert. The hunt was on. The next morning I stood in front of the mirror in my guest bathroom and practiced looking like a broken man. It is harder than you think. When you have spent 40 years standing tall on scaffolding, your spine does not want to curve. Your shoulders do not want to slump. But today I had to be an actor. I had to be the defeated, confused old pensioner that Vanessa and her family desperately wanted me to be. I put on a faded cardigan that smelled of mothballs. I left my construction boots by the door and put on a pair of soft, worn-out loafers. I didn't shave. I let the gray stubble on my chin look messy. I walked into the kitchen. Brandon was sitting at the table reviewing the psychiatric evaluation documents Vargas had arranged. He looked up, confused. Dad, why are you dressed like that? I am going fishing, I said. He looked at my loafers. You don't fish in loafers. I am fishing for sharks, Brandon, and sharks are attracted to blood in the water. I am going to bleed for them. I drove my truck to Cedar Lane, but I didn't drive with my usual aggression. I drove 10 miles under the speed limit. I hunched over the wheel. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the curtains twitch. They were watching. They were always watching. I grabbed the manila envelope from the passenger seat. This was the bait. Inside were deeds and tax assessments for a 50-acre parcel of commercial land in Scottsdale, Arizona. The documents looked incredibly official. They had embossed seals and stamps. They were also completely fake. Vargas had his team mock them up at 4 a.m. The land existed, but it was a worthless strip of desert scrub owned by a shell company Vargas controlled. The appraisal inside said it was worth $500,000. I walked up the path, slowly, leaning heavily on the handrail. I didn't bring my hammer this time. I rang the doorbell and waited, head bowed. The door opened. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Richard. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight around the gut. He looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and triumph. "Back for more, Garrison," he sneered. "The police said 500 feet. I have my finger on the dial." I didn't look him in the eye. I looked at his shoes. I let my hand tremble as I held out the envelope. "I am not here to fight, Richard," I said, my voice cracking just enough. "I am tired. I barely slept. I read the medical reports Vanessa sent over, the ones about Brandon." Richard paused. His eyes narrowed. "You read them?" I nodded slowly. I didn't want to believe it. But I saw the videos, the way he was screaming. I let out a shuddering sigh. "You were right, Richard. I hate to say it, but you were right. The boy is broken. He is not the son I raised." Richard's posture changed instantly. He relaxed. He puffed out his chest. The predator sensed weakness. "It is a tragedy, Garrison," he said, his voice taking on a fake, oily sympathy. "We tried to help him. We really did. But he is beyond help. He needs professional institutionalization." I wiped a hand across my face. "I know, I can't take care of him. I am nearly 70. I have a bad heart. I can't have a violent man in my house." I looked up, meeting his eyes for a second with a pleading look. "I am going to check him into the facility in Oregon that Vanessa suggested. I am done." Richard smiled. It was the smile of a man who just won the lottery without buying a ticket. "That is a wise decision, Garrison. It is best for everyone, especially the children." "The children," I repeated. "That is why I am here. I don't care about Brandon anymore. He is a lost cause. But Leo and Max, they are my blood." I lifted the envelope. "I have some assets, Richard. Things I haven't told anyone about. Old investments from my contracting days. I was saving this for my retirement, but, well, the boys need it more." Richard's eyes dropped to the envelope. "Greed is a physical thing. You can see it. It dilates the pupils. It makes the mouth water." "What kind of assets?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Land," I said. "In Arizona, near the new tech corridor. I had it appraised last week. It is worth about $500,000. I saw the number hit him like a physical blow. 500,000. I knew his financial situation thanks to Vargas. I knew he was leveraged to the hilt. I knew the BMW in this garage was leased on credit he didn't have. 500,000 was a lifeline. He opened the door wider. "Why don't you come in, Garrison? Let's talk." I shuffled inside. The house was quiet. Vanessa and Diane were in the kitchen, sitting at the island with laptops open, probably ruining someone else's life on social media. They looked up, startled, when I walked in. "What is he doing here?" Vanessa snapped, standing up. Richard raised a hand. "Peace, Nessie. Garrison is seeing reason. He agrees about Brandon. He is putting him in the facility." Vanessa looked at me, suspicious. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely devoid of empathy. "Really?" I slumped into a chair at the dining table. I put the envelope down. "He is my son," I said, my voice thick with fake grief. "But he is dangerous. I can't handle him. You were right to protect the boys. Diane, the mother, leaned forward. She was the architect of the trust fund theft. I knew she was the dangerous one. And what is that? She asked, pointing a manicured nail at the envelope. It is the boys' future, I said. I am selling my land in Arizona. $500,000. I want to set up an irrevocable trust for Leo and Max. I saw the look that passed between the three of them. It was electric. But I continued adding the hook. I can't be the trustee. I am too old. And I certainly can't let Brandon near it. He would just spend it on whatever he is on. I looked at Diane. You handled the startup capital so well. You protected it from him. I was thinking, maybe you could manage this too. Just until the boys are 21. Diane smiled. It was a terrifying sight. Garrison Y would be honored. We only want what is best for those angels. Vanessa walked over. She picked up the envelope and pulled out the fake appraisal. Her eyes scanned the numbers. She licked her lips. This looks legitimate, she said. It is, I lied. But there is a problem. My lawyer says I can't just cut Brandon out unless there is a consensus on his mental state. If I set up this trust, Brandon could sue later and claim he was competent. He could drain it. I looked at Vanessa. I need to be sure he can't touch it. We are already filing for conservatorship, Vanessa said quickly. I know, I said, but that takes time. I have a buyer for the land now. I need to close this deal next week. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a document Vargas had drafted. It was a single page. Simple. Deadly. My lawyer drew this up, I said. It is an affidavit of incapacity and consent to financial guardianship. Basically, it says that we, the undersigned family members, agree that Brandon Ford is mentally incompetent and that we designate, I pointed to Diane Whitmore, as the sole financial guardian of his potential assets, specifically this trust. I pushed the paper across the table. If we all sign this, I can transfer the land deed to the trust immediately. The money will be safe from him. Vanessa picked up the paper. She read it carefully. She was smart, but she was arrogant. She was looking for a trap that would hurt her, not realizing the trap was in what she was admitting to. It says here that we attest to witnessing his violent behavior and drug use, she said. Well, you did, didn't you? I asked. That is what you told the police. Yes, of course, she said quickly. And it says that Diane agrees to take full fiduciary responsibility for the assets, bypassing probate and standard court oversight, I added. Diane snatched the paper. That means I have total control, I said. To protect the boys. They didn't hesitate. They didn't call their lawyer. They saw $500,000 sitting on the table waiting to be grabbed. They saw an old man giving up. Do you have a pen? Richard asked. I handed him my cheap plastic Bic. He signed with a flourish. Diane signed next. Then Vanessa. They pushed the paper back to me. There, Vanessa said. It is done. When can you transfer the deed? I folded the paper carefully and put it in my pocket. Next to it, I felt the small digital recorder I had been running since I stepped out of the truck. I will call my lawyer in the morning, I said, standing up. It took effort not to stand up straight. I had to remember to groan a little as I rose. Thank you, Garrison, Diane said. You are doing the right thing. I looked at them. The three of them sitting around the table, smug and satisfied. They thought they had just secured another fortune. They didn't know what they had just signed. The document wasn't just an affidavit. The way Vargas had worded the specific clauses about fiduciary responsibility and asset knowledge meant that by signing they were legally claiming they had intimate knowledge of Brandon's finances. If we could prove Brandon was sane and that the drug use was them poisoning him, this document would become a signed confession of conspiracy to defraud. They had just admitted in writing that they were coordinating to seize assets based on a medical condition they had fabricated. Furthermore, by accepting guardianship of a trust funded by land sales, they were opening themselves up to a forensic audit of all trusts they managed, including the one with the startup money. They had just invited the vampire into their house. I walked to the door. "You know," Garrison Richard called out, "you aren't as stubborn as I thought. Maybe we can let you see the boys on weekends. Supervised, of course." I stopped. I didn't turn around. I let the mask drop. My shoulders straightened. My grip on the door handle tightened until the metal groaned. "We will see Richard," I said. I stepped out into the cool morning air. I walked to my truck. I didn't hunch. I strode. I got in and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. "They took the bait," I whispered. Now I just had to reel them in. And I was going to use a heavy line. The air in family court smells like floor wax and desperation. I sat in the second row of the gallery directly behind the defense table. My suit was charcoal gray, tailored and expensive. I sat with my hands folded on my knees, my back straight, watching the performance art taking place in front of me. Vanessa was sitting at the plaintiff's table. She had dressed for the role of the grieving, terrified wife perfectly. She wore a modest navy blue dress with a high collar. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She held a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that I knew were dry. Next to her sat her lawyer, a man named Sterling, who looked like he cost $500 an hour and smelled like he slept in a tanning bed. My son Brandon sat next to Vargas. Brandon looked better than he had 2 days ago, but he was still shaky. The detox was working, but his hands trembled when he poured water from the pitcher. He looked at Vanessa with a mixture of fear and confusion. He still didn't want to believe she was a monster. He was about to find out she was worse. The judge was a woman named Harrison. She had eyes like flint, and she looked like she had heard every lie ever told in the city of Seattle. She looked at Vanessa. "Mrs. Ford," the judge said, "you are asking for an emergency conservatorship over your husband. You are claiming he is a danger to himself and others. That is a very high bar." Sterling stood up. "Your Honor, we are not making this request lightly. Mr. Ford has suffered a complete psychotic break. He has been violent. He has destroyed property. He has threatened the safety of his children and my client's parents. We have video evidence." "Play it," Judge Harrison said. Sterling set up a laptop and turned the monitor toward the bench. He pressed play. The audio filled the courtroom. It was the sound of glass shattering. On the screen, my son was screaming. He was in his own kitchen wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt. He was red-faced, sweating, and his eyes were wild. He picked up a ceramic bowl and threw it against the wall. He was yelling about spiders. He was yelling that the walls were melting. "See," Vanessa whispered loudly enough for the microphone to pick it up. He was hallucinating. I was so scared for the boys. I watched the video. I saw my son breaking down. It was painful to watch. It looked like madness. To anyone in that room who didn't know the truth, it looked like a man who needed to be locked up for his own good. Sterling paused the video. "Your Honor, this was 3 days ago. This is the man who wants custody of 2 5-year-old boys. This is the man who controls a bank account. We are asking for this conservatorship to protect him from burning his own house down." Judge Harrison looked at Brandon. "Mr. Ford, do you remember this incident?" Brandon stood up. His voice shook. "I remember being angry. Your Honor, but I don't remember the spiders. I don't remember throwing the bowl. I felt like I was dreaming." Sterling smirked. "A lack of memory is consistent with a psychotic episode, Your Honor." Vargas stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his jacket. He looked calm. He looked like a man holding a royal flush. "Your Honor," Vargas said, "we do not dispute that the man in that video was experiencing a psychotic episode. We do not dispute that he was hallucinating. Sterling looked confused. Then you concede the motion? No, Vargas said. We dispute the cause. The plaintiff claims Mr. Ford is mentally ill. We claim he was poisoned. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Vanessa stiffened. She turned around and looked at me. I didn't blink. I just stared at her until she looked away. Poisoned, Judge Harrison asked, raising an eyebrow. That is a serious accusation, Counselor. It is, Vargas said. And we have proof. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A. It is a video file. Sterling objected. We haven't seen this evidence. This is an ambush. It is rebuttal evidence, Vargas said smoothly. It directly addresses the video you just showed. Allow it, the judge said. Vargas connected his tablet to the system. The screen flickered. It showed the same kitchen from the previous video, but from a different angle. This angle was high up, looking down from the ceiling corner. I had installed that camera myself a month ago. I had gone over to fix a faulty smoke detector for Vanessa. She had complained about the beeping. I replaced the battery, but I also replaced the housing with a unit that contained a 4K camera and a 30-day hard drive. I did it because I didn't trust them with my grandsons. I never thought I would catch an attempted murder. The timestamp on the video was 7:00 a.m., the morning of Brandon's breakdown. Vanessa walked into the frame. She was wearing her bathrobe. She looked calm. She opened the cabinet and took out a prescription bottle. She took out a mortar and pestle from the pantry. She dumped 4 large white pills into the mortar. She began to grind them. She wasn't rushing. She was humming. She poured the white powder into a world's best dad mug. She brewed coffee over it. She added cream and sugar. She stirred it until the powder was dissolved. Then Brandon walked into the kitchen. He looked tired but normal. He kissed her on the cheek. She handed him the mug. She smiled at him. She watched him drink it. She watched him drink every drop. The video fast-forwarded 20 minutes. Brandon was sitting at the table holding his head. He tried to stand up and stumbled. Vanessa didn't help him. She just watched. Then she pulled out her phone and started recording him. She started shouting at him, asking him why he was acting crazy, even though he was just sitting there moaning. She was antagonizing him, poking him, driving the reaction she wanted to film. The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Vargas stopped the video. Your Honor, Vargas said, we have a second witness, Dr. Aris, a forensic toxicologist from San Francisco. Dr. Aris took the stand. He was a small man with thick glasses and a resume that scared people. Dr. Aris, Vargas asked, Did you examine Mr. Ford yesterday? I did, the doctor said. I took blood, urine, and hair follicle samples. And what did you find? Dr. Aris opened a file. Mr. Ford's hair follicles show a consistent high-level ingestion of haloperidol over the last 6 months. Haloperidol is a potent antipsychotic used to treat severe schizophrenia. It is a heavy sedative. In high doses, given to a person who does not have psychosis, it causes confusion, hallucinations, motor loss, and memory gaps. It mimics a psychotic break. Did Mr. Ford have a prescription for this drug? Vargas asked. No, the doctor said. However, we ran a check on the state database. His mother-in-law, Diane Whitmore, has an active prescription for this exact dosage. Vargas turned to the judge. Your Honor, Vanessa Ford wasn't documenting a mental illness. She was manufacturing one. She was drugging her husband to incapacitate him so she could seize control of his assets. This isn't a conservatorship case. This is assault with a deadly weapon. Judge Harrison looked at Vanessa. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Mrs. Ford, the judge said, do you have an explanation for why you were grinding prescription antipsychotics into your husband's coffee? Vanessa stood up. Her lawyer tried to pull her down, but she shook him off. The Victim Act was gone. Her face was twisted and ugly. "He needed it," she shrieked. "He was out of control. I was managing him. I was trying to save our marriage." "Sit down," the judge barked. I looked at Richard and Diane in the back row. They were trying to inch toward the door. A bailiff stepped in front of them, arms crossed. Judge Harrison slammed her gavel. "The motion for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order against Vanessa Ford, Richard Whitmore, and Diane Whitmore. You are to have no contact with Brandon Ford or the minor children." She turned to the bailiff. "Take Mrs. Ford into custody. I am holding her in contempt of court for filing a fraudulent motion, and I am referring this evidence to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation regarding the poisoning." Two bailiffs moved toward Vanessa. She looked at them stunned. She looked at her parents. They looked away. Then she looked at Brandon. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't take the boys. I am their mother. You forfeited that right when you turned their father into a zombie," I said from the gallery. I couldn't help myself. Vanessa glared at me. Then a smile curled on her lips. It was a terrifying, broken thing. "Fine," she spat, as the bailiffs grabbed her arms. "Take the kids. Take the crazy husband. But you aren't getting the money, Garrison." "Sterling." Her lawyer tried to hush her, but she was rolling now. "It is gone," she yelled as they dragged her toward the side door. "The startup capital, the savings, it is all gone. He signed the trust documents. It was a gift. It is a legal contract. You can prove I drugged him, but you can't prove he didn't want to give it to us. The money is ours. You will never see a dime of it." The door slammed shut behind her. The echo hung in the room. Brandon slumped in his chair. He looked at me. "Dad, she is right. The trust. It is irrevocable. Even if she goes to jail, Diane controls the money. It is spent. They bought the house, they bought the car, it is gone." Vargas began packing up his briefcase. He looked calm. He looked unbothered. I walked up to the railing. I put my hand on Brandon's shoulder. "She thinks she won the war because she kept the loot," I said quietly. "She thinks money is just numbers in a bank account. She doesn't understand how the world works." Brandon looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "It was $150,000, Dad, plus my savings. It is $250,000. We are broke." I leaned in close so only he and Vargas could hear. "They didn't steal the money, son," I whispered. "They moved it. They put it into real estate. They put it into a vacation rental. They put it into a brand. They turned liquid cash into hard assets." I smiled. "And assets can be seized. Assets can be foreclosed on. They think they own that vacation house, no. They used your money for the down payment, but they took out a mortgage for the rest. A mortgage they can't pay because they don't have jobs." "But the bank will take it," Brandon said. "Not the bank," I corrected. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my inside pocket. It was a purchase agreement I had signed an hour before court started. "I bought the debt, Brandon. I used my shell company. I bought their mortgage note from the local lender this morning. I am their bank now." Brandon stared at me. You own their debt." "I own everything I said. I own the mortgage on the vacation house. I own the lien on the BMW. And since they lied on their loan applications about their income, I can call the loans due immediately. Today." I patted his shoulder. "The money isn't lost, son. It is just sitting in a house that I am about to foreclose on. We are going to take it all back. And we are going to do it while Vanessa watches from a jail cell." Vargas snapped his briefcase shut. "Shall we go to the party, Garrison?" I checked my watch. Vanessa had sent out invites for her lifestyle brand launch party for this evening. She thought she would be celebrating her victory over Brandon. "Let's go," I said. I hate to miss a celebration. especially when I am the one shutting off the lights. We didn't go out to celebrate after the court hearing. Celebration is for when the job is done, and the job wasn't done. The job was just entering the demolition phase. I took Brandon and Vargas to a small office building downtown that housed Vargas's forensic accounting team. The room smelled of stale coffee and laser printer toner. It was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that happens before an airstrike. We met with Mercer. He was a forensic accountant who used to work for the IRS chasing cartel money. He was a small man with gray skin and eyes that looked like they had seen every sin mankind had ever committed to a spreadsheet. He didn't shake hands. He just pointed at a whiteboard covered in flowcharts and red lines. "You were right," Garrison Mercer said without preamble. "They are sloppy, they are arrogant, and they are broke." He tapped a marker against a box labeled "The Trust." "Here is the $150,000, he said. It didn't stay in the trust account for more than 48 hours. Diane Whitmore moved it. She layered it through 2 shell companies trying to make it look like investment dividends. But she is an amateur. I traced it in 10 minutes. "Where did it go?" I asked. Mercer drew a line to a photo of a house. It was a modern glass-fronted vacation rental overlooking Lake Chelan. It was beautiful. It was ostentatious. It was exactly the kind of place people buy when they want to look rich, but don't have the cash flow to support it. "They bought this," Mercer said. "A luxury vacation rental. Purchase price $1.2 million. They put down $200,000. That is your son's startup capital plus his drained savings account." Brandon made a noise in his throat. "That was everything," he whispered. "That was 5 years of work. It gets better." Mercer said, his voice dry as dust. "To get the mortgage for the remaining $1 million they needed to show income. Richard hasn't had a job in 6 years. Diane sells essential oils on Facebook. They have 0 verifiable income, so they lied." Mercer slapped a document onto the table. It was a uniform residential loan application. "They fabricated tax returns," Mercer said. "They claimed Richard was a consultant for a firm that doesn't exist. They claimed the trust fund was an income-generating asset. This is mortgage fraud, Garrison. Federal bank fraud. If the lender knew the down payment was stolen funds and the income was fake, they would foreclose immediately." I looked at the document. It was a death warrant. They had signed their names to a federal crime to buy a party house. "Who holds the note?" I asked. Mercer checked his file. "A small regional lender. Cascade Mountain Bank. They are aggressive. They don't like bad paper." I nodded. "Good. What else?" Mercer drew another line. This one went to a logo. It was a stylized V made of gold leaf. "Vanessa isn't just buying real estate," Mercer said. "She is building a brand. She calls it the Vanessa Method. It is a lifestyle brand. Wellness coaching, overcoming trauma. She spent the last of the liquid cash, about $40,000, on inventory. Branded yoga mats, supplements, skincare. And a launch party." "A launch party," I repeated. Mercer handed me a glossy card. It was an invitation. It was heavy cardstock with gold lettering. "The Vanessa Method, launching a new life. Join Vanessa Ford as she shares her journey of survival and success. Tonight, 7:00 p.m., the Harbor Club." I read the invitation. Survival. She was pivoting. She was going to use the tragedy of her husband's mental illness as a marketing hook. She was going to stand on stage and tell the world how she survived living with a crazy man, all while selling them $40 vitamins bought with that crazy man's money. It was sick. It was brilliant. It was about to be her funeral. "She thinks she is in the clear," Vargas said, looking at the invite. "She thinks because the money is spent we can't touch it. She thinks the house is hers and the inventory is hers." "She is wrong," I said. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. I thought about the hammer I used on the door. That was brute force. This required precision. Mercer, I said, what is the status of that mortgage on the lake house? It is current, Mercer said, but only because they prepaid the first 2 months. They have no liquidity left. They are cash poor. They are relying on the rental income to pay the mortgage, but the house isn't even listed yet. They are underwater, and they don't know it. And the BMW, I asked. Leased, Mercer said, under Richard's name. But again, fraudulent income statements. I turned back to the room. Vargas, I said, do we still have the shell company we used for the Arizona land deal bait? Apex Holdings, Vargas said. Yes. It is active and funded. Good, I said. I want you to call Cascade Mountain Bank. I want you to call the leasing company for the BMW. I want you to tell them that Apex Holdings is looking to acquire high-risk distressed debt. Vargas smiled. He saw where I was going. You want to buy their mortgage, he said. I want to buy everything, I said. I want to buy the note on the lake house. I want to buy the note on the car. I want to buy every cent of debt they have. I want to become their bank. Can we do that in 6 hours? Brandon asked, looking between us. With enough cash, you can do anything in 6 hours, I said. Vargas got on the phone. I listened as he worked his magic. He spoke the language of finance, a language of leverage and risk. He told the bank that he had information regarding the fraudulent nature of the Whitmore loan. He told them he was willing to take the toxic asset off their books for face value cash today. Banks are simple creatures. They hate risk. When you offer them a way out of a fraud case with zero loss, they take it. By 3:00 p.m., the paperwork was coming through. Apex Holdings, a company solely owned by Garrison Ford, was now the legal holder of the mortgage on the property at 12 Lakeview Drive. I also held the paper on Richard's BMW. I looked at the documents. I owned them. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the car they drove. And because they had committed fraud to get these loans, I didn't have to wait for them to miss a payment. I could call the loan due. I could demand full repayment of the principal immediately due to material breach of contract. They owed me $1.2 million, and they had until I decided to ask for it. I wasn't done. Mercer, I said, what about this inventory? The yoga mats, the supplements. Where is it physically located? It was delivered to the venue, Mercer said. The Harbor Club. They are setting up for the party right now. I looked at Brandon. He was staring at the flowchart tracing the lines of his stolen life. That inventory was bought with stolen funds, I said. Technically, it is proceeds of a crime. Vargas nodded. We could file for an injunction to seize it, but that takes a judge. I don't need a judge to seize it, I said. I just need to be the owner of the venue. Vargas laughed. You going to buy the Harbor Club, Garrison? That is out of your budget. No, I said, but I know the owner. Frank Russo. I built that club 20 years ago. I poured the foundation. He still owes me a favor for fixing a drainage issue off the books last winter. I pulled out my phone and dialed Frank. Frank, I said when he answered. It's Garrison. I need a favor. You have an event tonight. The Vanessa Method launch. Yeah, Frank said. Big to do. They paid top dollar for the ballroom. Why? Because they paid for it with stolen money, Frank. And I am coming to collect. I need you to let me and my team in the back door. And I need you to give me access to the AV system. Garrison Frank sighed. I run a business. I can't just let you crash a party. You can if you don't want the police raiding your club for hosting a money laundering operation, I said. Because that is what this is, Frank. And when the feds come, do you want to be the guy who helped them or the guy who cashed the check? There was a long silence. The back door code is 4490, Frank said. Don't break anything you can't pay for. I hung up. I looked at Brandon. Get dressed, son. We are going to a party. Brandon looked terrified. Dad, she has people there. Influencers, media. If we go in there, she will spin it. She will say we are stalking her. She will play the victim on a global stage. Let her, I said. Let her build the stage as high as she wants. It just means she has further to fall. I went to my truck and grabbed a fresh suit I kept in the back for funeral and weddings. It was black. It fit me like armor. I dressed in the office bathroom. When I came out, I looked like a shark in a tie. Vargas was packing a briefcase with the mortgage documents, the transfer of debt, and the affidavits from the bank, admitting they had been defrauded. Mercer handed me a flash drive. This has the paper trail, Mercer said. The bank transfers. The shell companies. The text messages between Diane and Vanessa, joking about how easy it was to trick Brandon. It is all here. I put the drive in my pocket. We drove to the Harbor Club in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of bruised purple and blood orange. It was fitting. We parked around the back near the loading docks. We could hear the music thumping from inside. It was upbeat, empowering music. The kind of music that plays while people lie to you about how perfect their lives are. I looked at Brandon. He was shaking slightly. You don't have to say a word, I told him. You just have to stand there. You have to let them see you. Let them see that you aren't the broken, crazy man they described. Let them see you standing tall. Can you do that? Brandon took a deep breath. He adjusted his collar. He looked at the door. She stole my life, Dad, he said. She stole my time with my boys. She made me think I was crazy. He looked at me and his eyes were hard. I can stand there. I can stand there and watch her burn. Good, I said. I punched the code into the keypad. The lock clicked. We stepped into the service corridor. The smell of expensive catering and perfume wafted toward us. We walked through the kitchen past startled chefs and found the door to the main ballroom. I cracked it open. The room was bathed in soft pink light. There were round tables with white linens, centerpieces made of driftwood and orchids. At the front of the room was a stage with a massive screen. On the screen was a photo of Vanessa looking serene and strong, gazing out over a mountain range. The text on the screen read, "Rising from the ashes, a journey of strength." Vanessa was on stage. She was wearing a white pantsuit that looked like it cost more than my truck. She was holding a microphone. She looked radiant. She looked successful. She looked like a lie. Thank you all for being here, Vanessa said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. The last few years have been a nightmare. Living with a partner who suffers from severe mental illness. It drains you. It breaks you. I lost everything trying to save him. The crowd murmured sympathetically, but she continued smiling through her tears. I had to make a choice. I had to choose myself. I had to choose my children. I had to build something from nothing to ensure their future. And that is what this brand is. It is my promise that no woman has to be a victim. I looked at Vargas. He nodded. I looked at Brandon. He was staring at her, his jaw tight. Let's go, I whispered. We stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen doorway. We didn't run. We walked. We walked down the center aisle, 3 men in dark suits cutting through the sea of pastel dresses and champagne flutes. Heads started to turn. The murmurs changed from sympathy to confusion. Vanessa saw us. She stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she had seen a ghost. In a way she had. She was looking at the man she thought she had buried. We kept walking. We walked right up to the edge of the stage. I didn't climb up. I didn't need to. I just stood there looking up at her. Security. Vanessa squeaked into the microphone. It was a high, panicked sound. Please remove these men. They are my stalkers. A A couple of rent-a-cops started moving toward us from the sides. I pulled out the flash drive. I held it up. "Frank!" I shouted toward the sound booth at the back of the room. "Play it." Frank Russo. My old friend didn't hesitate. He cut Vanessa's mic. The screen behind her flickered. The photo of her serene face vanished. In its place, a bank statement appeared. It was massive, projected 10 feet high. It showed a transfer of $150,000. It showed the destination, V Life Ventures. Then the audio started. It was crystal clear. It played through the concert-quality speakers of the ballroom. "Mom, he signed it." Vanessa's voice rang out. "He actually signed the trust papers. He thinks it is for the boys. He is so drugged up he can barely hold a pen." The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the space. Vanessa dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a thud. Good Diane's voice replied from the speakers. "Transfer it immediately. We need that down payment for the lake house before the bank runs a credit check on your father." I turned to the crowd. "She didn't build this from nothing." I boomed my voice, carrying to the back of the room. "She built it with stolen money. She drugged her husband. She lied to the police. And she is lying to you." Vanessa screamed. It was a primal animal sound. "Stop it, turn it off." But it didn't stop. The screen changed again. It showed the foreclosure notice I had drafted with Vargas. It showed the seizure order for the inventory. The guests were pulling out their phones. They weren't calling the police. They were recording. They were live streaming the destruction of the Vanessa method. I looked at Vanessa. She was shrinking. The white suit didn't look powerful anymore. It looked like a shroud. Richard and Diane rushed the stage from the VIP table. They looked furious. "You can't do this," Richard yelled. "This is slander." I looked at Richard. I smiled. "Nice car, Richard," I said. "I hope you enjoyed the test drive. Because I own it now, and I am taking the keys back." The doors at the back of the room opened. This time it wasn't catering staff. It was the police. And they weren't here for me. They were here for the people who had signed a fraudulent loan application. The party was over. The hangover was just beginning. The Harbor Club was vibrating with the kind of energy that only money can buy. Not old money which whispers, but new stolen money which screams. The air inside the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the desperate ambition of 100 social media influencers vying for the perfect lighting. Waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, offering flutes of vintage champagne to women in gowns that cost more than my first truck. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance with my son and my lawyer watching the spectacle. It was a masterclass in deception. The room was bathed in a soft, flattering rose gold light. Silk drapes covered the walls. Centerpieces made of driftwood and imported orchids sat on every table. And everywhere you looked, there was the logo. A stylized golden V interlaced with a lotus flower. The Vanessa method. It was stamped on yoga mats etched into crystal water bottles and embroidered on silk robes displayed like holy relics on velvet pedestals. It was impressive. It was elegant. It was a crime scene. On the stage, standing in a spotlight that made her skin glow, was Vanessa. She looked like a movie star. She was wearing a white tailored pantsuit with a plunging neckline, her hair cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She held the microphone with a delicate grip, her other hand resting theatrically over her heart. She wasn't just speaking. She was performing. She was weaving a narrative so compelling that even the cynical bartenders were leaning in to listen. I looked at my son, Brandon. He stood beside me, adjusting his cuffs. He was no longer the broken man shivering in a parking garage. The suit I had bought him fit like armor. His hair was trimmed, his face clean-shaven, his jaw set in a line of granite. He looked like the CEO he was supposed to be. He looked like a man ready to reclaim his name. "Are you ready?" I whispered. He watched his wife on stage, listening to her destroy his character to elevate her own. "I am ready," he said. His voice was cold. We waited. Timing is everything in construction, and it is everything in demolition. We needed her to build the tower as high as possible before we pulled the pin. Vanessa paced the stage, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "You know," she said, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "People see the success, the brand, the beautiful home, and they think it was easy. They don't see the nights I spent crying on the bathroom floor. They don't see the fear." She paused for effect. The room was dead silent. "My husband, he was the love of my life," she continued, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. "But mental illness is a thief. It stole him from me. It turned the gentle man I married into a stranger, a dangerous stranger. I tried everything to save him. I exhausted our savings on doctors, on treatments, on hope. But in the end, I had to make the hardest choice of my life. I had to choose survival. I had to choose my children." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. I saw Richard and Diane Whitmore sitting at the VIP table in the front row, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the supportive, grieving grandparents. They were drinking champagne bought with my retirement fund. "I built this brand from nothing," Vanessa declared, her voice rising, swelling with triumphant music that began to play softly in the background. "I built it from the ashes of my marriage. I built it with my own 2 hands, scraping together every penny working, while my babies slept because I refused to let my family become a statistic. I stand here today as proof that a woman can lose everything and still build an empire." The crowd erupted. Applause thundered against the walls. People were standing up, cheering for the brave survivor. That was the signal. "Let's go," I said. We walked out of the shadows. We didn't rush. We didn't run. We walked down the center aisle of the ballroom with the heavy rhythmic tread of executioners. I was flanked by Brandon on my right and Vargas on my left. 3 men in black suits cutting through a sea of pastel chiffon and lies. The applause nearest to us began to die down as people noticed us. Heads turned. Whispers started. The wave of silence spread from the back of the room toward the front, rolling over the crowd, until the only sound left was the triumphant music playing on the speakers. Vanessa was basking in the ovation, her eyes closed, head thrown back. When the applause died prematurely, she opened her eyes. She looked out into the crowd, confused. Then she saw us. She froze. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a physical blow. She lowered the microphone, her hand shaking. She took a step back, nearly tripping over a monitor speaker. Richard and Diane turned around in their seats. Diane dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the hardwood floor, a sharp, ugly sound that punctuated the silence. We kept walking. We walked right up to the edge of the stage. I stopped and looked up at her. Security Vanessa screeched into the microphone. The feedback squealed, making everyone wince. "Security, remove these men. They are stalking me." 2 large men in black t-shirts started to move toward us from the sides of the room. They looked like hired muscle paid to throw out drunks and crashers. I didn't flinch. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a gold envelope. I turned to the nearest security guard, a guy with a neck like a tree stump. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, son," I said, my voice calm and booming enough to be heard without a mic. "I am the gold sponsor of this event." The guard stopped. He looked at Vanessa, then back at me. "What?" Vanessa gasped. "That's a lie. The gold sponsor is an anonymous angel investor." "Anonymous until now," I said. I climbed the stairs onto the stage. My knees hurt, but I didn't show it. I walked over to the podium. Vanessa backed away from me as if I were radioactive. I reached for the microphone stand. Vanessa clutched her handheld mic to her chest. "Get away from me," she hissed off mic. "You are ruining everything." "Give me the microphone, Vanessa," I said. She shook her head frantically, looking at her parents for help. Richard was standing up, his face purple, but he was blocked by Vargas, who had quietly positioned himself between the VIP table and the stage steps. I looked at the sound booth at the back of the room. I raised my hand. Frank Russo, the club owner, cut Vanessa's wireless mic. She kept talking, moving her lips, but no sound came out. She tapped the mic, panic rising in her eyes. I leaned into the podium mic, which was still live. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice filled the room, deep and gravelly. "My name is Garrison Ford, and that man standing right there," I pointed to Brandon, who was standing tall at the foot of the stage, looking at his wife with eyes of ice, "is Brandon Ford, the husband who is supposed to be crazy." The crowd gasped. Phones were raised. The live stream count was probably exploding. Vanessa lunged for me, trying to grab the podium mic. I caught her wrist. I didn't squeeze hard, just enough to stop her. "Let go of me," she screamed, her voice thin, without amplification. "He is violent. He is attacking me. I am not attacking you," I said into the mic. "I am correcting the record." I let her go. She stumbled back, panting. I looked out at the audience. I saw the confusion, the curiosity. They loved a train wreck, and I was about to give them a derailment. "You just heard a very moving story," I said. "A story about a woman pulling herself up by her bootstraps. A woman who built an empire from nothing but grit and determination." I turned and looked at Vanessa. She was trembling, trapped in the glare of the spotlight. "You told them you built this from scratch," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "You told them you saved your family." I took a step toward her. "No, Vanessa. You didn't build this. You bought it. And you didn't buy it with your hard-earned money. You bought it with $150,000 you stole from your husband's business account. You bought it with the life savings of the man you swore to love. And you bought it with the retirement fund you swindled from his father." "Liar," Richard shouted from the floor. "That money was a gift, a trust fund." I looked down at Richard. "A trust fund managed by a woman with 2 bankruptcies and a fraud settlement," I asked into the mic. The crowd murmured. The spell was breaking. The hero was turning into a villain right before their eyes. "You lied to the bank," I continued, turning back to the audience. "You lied to the police. You lied to this room full of people. You poisoned your husband with antipsychotics to make him look unstable so you could steal his life. You abandoned my grandsons in a parking garage." Vanessa was shaking her head violently, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't the pretty stage tears from before. These were ugly, terrified tears. "It's not true," she wailed. "He's the crazy one. Look at him, he's obsessed." Brandon stepped up onto the stage. He walked past me. He stood toe-to-toe with his wife. He took the microphone from the stand. "I'm not crazy," Vanessa Brandon said. His voice was steady. It was the voice of the man I raised. "I was drugged. And we have the blood tests to prove it. We have the hair follicle samples. We have the video of you grinding the pills in the kitchen." A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. "We know about the house on the lake," Brandon said. "We know about the BMW. We know about the fake tax returns." Vanessa looked at him, her eyes wide. She looked like a trapped animal. I did it for us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I did it for the brand. We were going to be rich, Brandon. I was going to fix everything." "You didn't fix anything," Brandon said. "You broke our family. You sold us out for a logo." He handed the microphone back to me. I looked at the crowd one last time. "This party is over," I said. "And so is the Vanessa method. Because you can't build a lifestyle brand on a foundation of felony fraud." I signaled to Vargas. He opened his briefcase on the edge of the stage. He pulled out a stack of red legal notices. "By the way," I said to Vanessa, "you mentioned you own the inventory here. The yoga mats, the vitamins." She nodded dumbly. "Actually, you don't," I said. Because you bought them with proceeds from a crime. And since I hold the debt you used to leverage this entire charade, I am exercising my right to seize collateral. I pointed to the exits. The doors swung open. But it wasn't guests leaving. It was a team of movers I had hired wearing shirts that said Apex Asset Recovery. Pack it up, I ordered. Everything with a logo on it. It belongs to me now. Vanessa collapsed to her knees on the stage. The image of the strong, independent survivor shattered into a million pieces. She wasn't a queen. She was a fraud, and her castle was being repossessed in real time. But the final blow hadn't landed yet. I looked toward the back of the room where the blue lights were flashing against the windows. And Vanessa, I said softly, leaning down to her, you might want to stand up. You have visitors. The police were coming through the doors, and this time they weren't here to escort me out. Richard Whitmore moved faster than I thought a man with gout and a penchant for expensive scotch could move. He scrambled up the side stairs of the stage, his face a mask of purple rage, veins bulging in his neck like cords of rope. Diane was right behind him, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood, looking less like the grand matriarch of high society, and more like a cornered animal realizing the trap has snapped shut. They weren't coming to apologize. They were coming to silence us. They were rushing the stage to protect the only thing they actually cared about, which was the illusion of their wealth. You represent everything that is wrong with this world, Garrison. Richard screamed, his voice cracking as he reached for the microphone stand. You are a liar and a sad old man who cannot accept that his son is a failure. You are slandering my daughter. I will sue you for every dime you have. I will take your truck. I will take your house. Diane grabbed Vanessa's arm, trying to pull her up from the floor where she had collapsed. Stand up, Vanessa, she hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. Don't let them see you weak. Deny everything. Tell them it is a deep fake. Tell them he tampered with the audio. I watched them with a kind of detached fascination. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. You see the cracks form, you hear the groans of the structural failure, and you know there is absolutely nothing that can stop gravity from doing its work. They were still trying to spin the narrative. They were still trying to gaslight a room full of people who had just heard the truth. I didn't shout back at Richard. I didn't need to. I had the microphone, but more importantly, I had the truth. And the truth was currently queued up in the sound booth at the back of the room. Frank, I said calmly into the mic. My voice boomed over Richard's shouting, drowning him out completely. Show them the kitchen. The massive screen behind us flickered. The damning bank statements vanished. In their place, a high-definition video appeared. It wasn't the security footage of the poisoning this time. This was footage from the hidden camera I had planted in my own dining room the morning I played the part of the defeated senile old man. The image was crisp. It showed the three of them, Vanessa, Richard, and Diane, sitting around my dining table. It showed me sliding the envelope across the mahogany. It showed the greed lighting up their eyes like fireworks. The audio was perfect. He is totally gone. Vanessa's voice rang out through the ballroom speakers. She was laughing in the video, holding the fake deed to the Arizona land. Did you see him? He was shaking. He actually thinks we are going to set up a trust for the boys. The ballroom went deathly silent. Richard stopped shouting. He stared up at the giant screen, watching himself nod in agreement. Old man Garrison is stupid, the video, Vanessa continued. Her face twisted in a sneer that clashed violently with the serene guru image she had plastered all over the venue. He is soft. He signed the papers. We get the last 500,000 out of him and our lives change forever. We can pay off the loan sharks before they break your legs, Dad. On the screen, Richard took a drink of water and smiled. Just make sure the doctor signs the commitment papers for Brandon on Thursday, video Richard said. We can't have him contesting the will once we help Garrison along to an early grave. The crowd let out a sound that was part gasp, part growl. It was the sound of a mob realizing they had been worshipping a monster. The influencers who had been live streaming the event were now panning their cameras from the screen to the stage, capturing the real-time destruction of the Whitmore family. Diane Whitmore let out a wail. She lunged toward the screen as if she could physically tear the image down. "Turn it off," she shrieked. "It is illegal. You recorded us without consent." I looked down at them. "You are in my house now, Diane," I said, my voice cold steel. "And in my house we pay our debts." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a thick red legal folder. It wasn't a prop. It was the death certificate of their financial existence. I held it up so everyone could see it. It was heavy with the weight of judgments, liens, and contracts. "You keep talking about suing me, Richard," I said. "You keep talking about taking my house. But you seem to have forgotten how the economy works. You can't sue your landlord for evicting you when you haven't paid rent. And you definitely can't sue the bank when they call in your loan." I opened the folder. I pulled out the mortgage deed for the vacation rental on Lake Chelan. I pulled out the title for the BMW. I pulled out the promissory note for the business loan Vanessa had taken out to buy the inventory for this very party. "You think you own that house on the lake?" I asked. Locking eyes with Richard. "You think you own the car in the garage? You think you own this brand?" I took a step closer, towering over him. "No," I said. "You don't own anything. You mortgaged it. You leveraged every single asset you stole from my son to buy things you couldn't afford. You took out a loan with Liberty Bank for the remodel. You took out a business line of credit with Cascade Mountain for the inventory. You signed your names on the dotted line." Richard was shaking his head, sweat pouring down his face. "So what?" he stammered. "We will pay it. The brand is going to launch. We will pay it next month." "No, you won't," I said. "Because banks don't like fraud, Richard. And they really don't like it when they find out the collateral for the loan was stolen money." I held up the purchase agreement Vargas had executed that morning. "This morning, my company GF Holdings purchased your entire debt portfolio from Liberty Bank and Cascade Mountain," I declared. "I bought your mortgage. I bought your car loan. I bought your business credit line. I bought it all for pennies on the dollar, because the banks were terrified of the liability when we showed them the forensic accounting." I dropped the papers at Richard's feet. They scattered like leaves. "I am your bank now, Richard. I am your lender. I am the man you owe $1.2 million to." Vanessa looked up from the floor. Her makeup was running in black streaks down her face. "You can't do that," she whispered. "We have a grace period. We have 30 days. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Read the fine print, Vanessa," I said. Clause 4, Section B, the default on fraud clause. If the borrower is found to have falsified income statements or used illicit funds for the down payment, the lender reserves the right to accelerate the loan. That means I don't have to wait for you to miss a payment. I leaned into the microphone, my voice echoing like the voice of God. "I am calling the loan due," I said. "Right now. I am demanding full repayment of the principal amount of $1.2 million. Immediately." The room was spinning for them. I could see it in their eyes. They looked around for an exit, for a lawyer, for anyone to save them. But there was no one. The guests were silent, judging recording. "We don't have it," Diane sobbed. "You know we don't have it." "Then I am exercising my right to seize collateral," I said. I snapped my fingers. The side doors of the ballroom burst open. A team of 6 men in gray uniforms marched in. They weren't police. They were private asset recovery agents. They carried rolls of red security tape and scanners. They moved with the efficiency of a demolition crew. One team went to the display tables where the expensive yoga mats and crystal water bottles were arranged. They started slapping bright red seized property stickers on everything. Another team went to the merchandise booth and began packing the vitamins into plastic crates. "What are you doing?" Vanessa screamed, scrambling to her feet. "That is my inventory. That is my brand. That is my collateral," I corrected her. "You bought it with the loan I now own. And since you can't pay me, I am taking it. All of it. Every mat, every bottle, every brochure with your face on it. It belongs to GF Holdings now." The asset recovery team worked fast. They stripped the room. They took the banners. They took the gift bags that were sitting on the chairs. They were erasing the Vanessa method in real time. Richard lunged at one of the agents who was tagging a box of skincare products. "You can't take that. That is worth $10,000. The agent, a man twice Richard's size, didn't even flinch. He just held up a clipboard. "Court order, sir. Step back, or you will be detained for interfering with a repossession." Brandon watched it all from the side of the stage. He wasn't smiling. He just looked relieved. The weight of the gaslighting was lifting off his shoulders. He was watching the physical dismantling of the lie that had almost killed him. But the final act wasn't the repossession. That was just business. The final act was justice. I looked toward the back of the room. The blue lights were still flashing against the windows, brighter now. The police had waited for me to finish my civil business. Now it was their turn. 4 officers walked into the ballroom. They weren't the beat cops who had escorted me away from the house. These were detectives. They wore suits and badges on their belts. One of them was holding a pair of handcuffs. They walked straight down the aisle. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They walked up the stairs to the stage. "Vanessa Ford," the lead detective said. He was a hard-looking man who didn't care about lifestyle brands. Vanessa looked at him, trembling. "Yes." "You are under arrest," he said. "For what?" she wailed. "I didn't do anything." The detective pulled out a warrant. "We have a warrant for your arrest for the poisoning of Brandon Ford with a controlled substance. We also have warrants for credit fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." He spun her around. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Richard and Diane Whitmore, the detective, continued looking down at the parents who were huddled together at the foot of the stairs. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and falsifying bank documents." Officers moved in on them. Richard tried to pull away, shouting about his rights, shouting that he was a victim. Diane just wept, her mascara ruining her silk blouse. As they were led away, marching past the guests they had tried so hard to impress, Vanessa looked back at me. Her eyes were full of hate. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "You are the devil." I stood on the stage watching them go. I felt the adrenaline begin to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But underneath the fatigue, there was peace. "I am not the devil, Vanessa," I said softly, though she was already too far away to hear. "I am just a father who did his job." I looked at Brandon. He walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He just hugged me. He buried his face in my shoulder and cried. He cried for the years he lost. He cried for the wife he thought he had. And he cried because he knew finally that he was safe. "Let's go home, son," I said. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the empty tables and the seized boxes behind us. We walked out into the cool night air. The stars were out. It was a good night for a fresh start. We had a lot of work to do. We had a house to reclaim. We had trust funds to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, the foundation was solid. The rot was gone. And the Ford family was still standing. The ballroom had transformed into a theater of the absurd. The soft, flattering lighting that was meant to highlight a brand launch now illuminated a public execution of character. The air, previously thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, now smelled of sweat and panic. I stood on the stage, my hands resting on the podium, watching the chaos unfold with the detached precision of a foreman watching a controlled demolition. The structure was coming down exactly as planned. The guests who only an hour ago had been sipping champagne and nodding along to Vanessa's tale of victimhood had turned into a mob of digital witnesses. Hundreds of phones were raised, their camera lenses gleaming like the eyes of predatory insects. They weren't filming the stage anymore. They were filming the aisles where the police were doing their work. Richard Whitmore was not going quietly. He was wrestling with a detective near the dessert table, knocking over a tower of macarons. He was screaming about lawsuits, about his constitutional rights, about knowing the mayor. It was a pathetic display. He looked less like a retired investment banker and more like a toddler being dragged out of a toy store. His face was a mottled purple, and his cashmere sweater was twisted around his torso. "Do you know who I am?" he bellowed, struggling as the officer forced his hands behind his back. "I am a pillar of this community. This is a mistake. You will all lose your badges." The detective didn't even blink. He just tightened the cuffs. The metallic click cut through Richard's shouting like a knife. Diane was putting on a different kind of show. She had slumped into a chair, weeping theatrically into a napkin, trying to garner sympathy from the women at the nearby tables. But the women were backing away, their faces twisted in disgust. They had seen the bank statements on the screen. They had heard the recordings. Diane reached out a hand toward a local news anchor she had been trying to impress all night. "Tell them," Diane sobbed. "Tell them we are good people. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." The news anchor didn't take her hand. She just zoomed in with her phone, capturing the mascara running down Diane's face in high definition. The social currency Diane had spent a lifetime hoarding had just been devalued to zero. But the main event was Vanessa. She stood at the bottom of the stage stairs, surrounded by 3 officers. She wasn't fighting physically like her father. She was fighting psychologically. She was cycling through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, spinning through them like a slot machine trying to hit a jackpot. First, she tried charm. She smiled at the lead detective, a trembling, fragile smile. "Officer, surely we can discuss this outside," she said, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "This is all just a family dispute. My father-in-law is confused. He has dementia. If you just let me explain." The detective ignored her. He read her rights from a small laminated card. "You have the right to remain silent." When charm failed, she switched to victimhood. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes wide and pleading. "Help me," she cried out. "They are hurting me. Look at them. 3 men against 1 woman. This is police brutality. Someone do something." No one moved. The silence from her former admirers was the loudest condemnation possible. They knew. They had seen the receipts. They knew she wasn't a victim. She was a predator who had finally met a bigger predator. When the victim act failed, the rage came. It was pure, unfiltered hatred. It distorted her beautiful face into a mask of ugliness. She spun around, her eyes locking onto me where I stood on the stage. "You did this," she screamed. Her voice was raw, shredding her throat. "You orchestrated this. You planned this whole thing." I looked down at her. I didn't say a word. I just nodded. The officers grabbed her arms to lead her away. She dug her heels into the plush carpet, fighting them every inch of the way. She was thrashing, kicking, losing her shoes. The elegant white pantsuit was ruined. As they dragged her past the stage, she lunged toward me, straining against the handcuffs that now bound her wrists. She looked up at me, her eyes burning with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this," she shrieked, spitting the words at me. "You destroyed my life. You destroyed my family. You are a monster, Garrison. You are the devil." The accusation hung in the air, echoing off the walls of the ballroom. The devil. It was the last defense of the guilty to demonize the hand of justice. I leaned into the microphone one last time. My voice was calm, deep, and final. It rumbled through the room, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "No, Vanessa," I said. "I am not the devil. You are the devil. You poisoned a good man. You abandoned your children. You stole a future that didn't belong to you. I paused, looking at the wreckage of her party, at the seized boxes, at the police lights, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers. I am just the garbage man, I said. And today was trash day. Vanessa let out a primal scream of frustration as the officers pushed her through the double doors. The heavy doors swung shut behind her, cutting off her voice. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. It was the silence of a storm passing. I stepped back from the podium. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Vargas. "It is done," he said quietly. "The warrants are executed. The assets are seized. The bank has already initiated the transfer of the titles to your holding company." I nodded. I felt old. I felt tired. But I felt clean. "Where is Brandon?" I asked. Vargas pointed toward the side entrance of the ballroom. "Look." I looked. The side door had opened, and a woman walked in. It was Mrs. Gable, the nanny, who had taken care of the twins since they were born. She was a stout, no-nonsense woman who had been fired by Vanessa 3 days ago because she had refused to testify that Brandon was unstable. I had rehired her this morning with a significant raise. She was holding the hands of 2 little boys, Leo and Max. They were dressed in their pajamas, clutching their favorite stuffed animals. They looked small and confused by the big room and the bright lights, but they were safe. Brandon was standing at the foot of the stage. He turned and saw them. The transformation in my son was instantaneous. The tension that had held his body rigid for days simply evaporated. He dropped to his knees on the ballroom floor, oblivious to the suit, oblivious to the crowd, oblivious to the cameras. He opened his arms. "Daddy," the boys yelled in unison. They broke away from Mrs. Gable and ran to him. They collided with him in a tangle of limbs and tears. Brandon wrapped his arms around them, burying his face in their necks, holding them as if they were the only solid things in the universe. He was sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook his shoulders, but they weren't tears of despair anymore. They were tears of relief. I walked down the stairs from the stage. I stood back, giving them space. This was their moment. I was just the contractor who had cleared the site so they could rebuild. As Brandon held his sons, the back doors opened again. The police were escorting Vanessa toward the patrol cars waiting outside. The path took them past the large glass windows of the ballroom entrance. Brandon looked up. He saw her. He saw his wife, the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted with his life, being shoved into the back of a police cruiser. Her hair was wild, her face was a ruin of makeup and tears. She looked through the glass, and for a second, her eyes met his. I watched my son's face closely. I was ready to step in. I was ready to remind him of the poison, of the theft, of the betrayal. I was afraid he would waver. I was afraid he would feel that old instinct to protect her, the instinct she had weaponized against him for so long. But he didn't waver. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked at her with a profound, hollow emptiness. It was the look you give to a stranger you see on the news who has committed a terrible crime. It was a look of total detachment. He looked at the woman who had tried to destroy him, and he felt nothing. The cord was cut. The spell was broken. He turned his head away from the window. He looked down at Leo and Max, who were asking if they could go home now. "Yes." Brandon said, his voice steady and strong. "We are going home. Not to that house, to Grandpa's house, but we are going home." He stood up, picking up one twin in each arm. He looked at me. His eyes were clear. The fog of the drugs was gone. The fog of the gaslighting was gone. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. I nodded. I couldn't speak. I had a lump in my throat the size of a brick. I just patted his shoulder. "Let's get out of here," I said. "I think we have caused enough trouble for one night." We walked out of the harbor club together. 3 generations of Ford men. We walked past the stunned guests who were still trying to process the drama they had witnessed. We walked past the empty tables and the seized inventory. We walked out into the parking lot. The air was crisp and cold. The flashing lights of the police cars were fading into the distance, taking the toxicity with them. I unlocked my truck. Brandon buckled the boys into the back seat. He got into the passenger side. I climbed into the driver's seat. I looked at them in the rearview mirror. The boys were already falling asleep, safe in the knowledge that their father was there. Brandon was leaning his head against the window, watching the city lights. I started the engine. The rumble of the diesel was a comforting sound. It was the sound of work. It was the sound of progress. We left the venue behind. We left the scandal behind. We left the Vanessa method in the dust. We were just a family in a truck driving north. We had a long road ahead of us. There would be legal battles. There would be therapy. There would be the hard work of untangling the financial mess Vanessa had left behind. But I wasn't worried. Hard work didn't scare me. Demolition was messy, but construction was what I was born to do. I drove toward the highway, my hands steady on the wheel. The nightmare was over. The sun would come up tomorrow on a different world, a world where my son was free, a world where my grandsons were safe, and a world where the Whitmore family was learning the very hard lesson that you do not steal from a man who builds foundations for a living. You just end up buried in the concrete. 3 months had passed since the night the Harbor Club became a crime scene. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The district attorney, armed with the evidence Vargas and I had provided, didn't hesitate. Vanessa Ford pled guilty to second-degree assault with a controlled substance and conspiracy to commit fraud in exchange for a lighter sentence, but lighter still meant 7 years in a state penitentiary. Richard and Diane Whitmore, facing federal charges for bank fraud and wire fraud, were sentenced to 5 years each in federal prison. The Vanessa method was dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay off the creditors, of which I was the largest. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. The rain had stopped, leaving the sky a brilliant, washed clean blue. I parked my truck in front of 420 Cedar Lane. The house looked different. The manicured hedges were a little wilder. The for sale sign that the bank had put up after the foreclosure was gone. I got out of the truck. Brandon was already there, standing on the sidewalk looking at the house. He looked like a new man. He had gained weight. The hollow, haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet confidence. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, holding the hands of Leo and Max. They ran to me as soon as they saw me. "Grandpa?" they shouted, tackling my legs. I laughed, ruffling their hair. "Hey, boys, you ready to see the surprise?" "Yes," they cheered. I looked at Brandon. He was staring at the house with a complicated expression. It was the scene of his trauma, but it was also the home he had chosen for his family. "It's empty," Brandon said quietly. "The bank auction was last week. I heard an investor bought it." "An investor did buy it," I said. I walked up the path to the front door. The lock I had smashed 3 months ago had been replaced with a standard deadbolt. No more smart locks, no more surveillance state. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of keys. I tossed them to Brandon. He caught them reflexively. "Open it," I said. He looked at the keys, then at me. "Dad, did you open the door?" "Brandon." He walked up the steps, his hand shaking slightly as he put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open. The house was empty of furniture, stripped of the staging Vanessa had used to project her perfect life. It smelled of paint and possibility. The walls, which had been a trendy cold gray, were now a warm cream. I had sent a crew in over the weekend to repaint. I wanted to erase every trace of the Whitmore aesthetic. The boys ran inside, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "Echo!" Leo shouted, delighted. Brandon walked into the foyer. He touched the wall where I had shoved Richard. He looked at the spot on the stairs where Vanessa had stood filming him. He took a deep breath, and I saw his shoulders relax. He was reclaiming the space. He was rewriting the memory. "You bought it back," he said, turning to me. "Dad, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's an $800,000 house." "I got it for $650 at the auction," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Cash. Nobody else wanted to touch it because of the legal history. But I know the bones are good. I checked the foundation myself." I walked over to him. "This isn't a gift, Brandon," I said, my voice serious. "I am not Vanessa's parents. I don't give handouts to buy loyalty. I am your lender now." I pulled a document from my back pocket. It was a mortgage agreement, standard terms, fair interest rate. "You are going to pay me back," I said. "Every cent, principal and interest. You have your job back at the tech firm. You have your consultancy. You can afford it." Brandon took the paper. He read the terms. He looked up at me and I saw gratitude, but more importantly, I saw respect. He didn't want charity. He wanted ownership. "I will pay you back," he said firmly. "Early." "I know you will," I said. "But this time the deed is in your name only. No trusts, no joint ownership. You are the master of this house, son. You make the rules." "Thank you, Dad," he said. He didn't hug me this time. He shook my hand. It was a firm grip, a man's grip. "Go on," I said, nodding toward the backyard where the boys were already exploring. "I think the grass needs cutting." We walked through the house to the back patio. The yard was large, fenced in, safe. The sun was warm on our faces. "Can we play baseball, Grandpa?" Max asked, finding an old plastic bat and ball in the corner of the yard that the movers must have missed. "You bet," I said. For the next hour I sat in a lawn chair I dragged out of the garage, sipping a cold root beer I had brought in a cooler. I watched my son pitch to my grandsons. I watched them run the bases, laughing, arguing about whether a hit was fair or foul. I watched them be children. They were safe. They were happy. The shadow of the last 2 years had lifted. Brandon hit a pop fly and Leo caught it, tumbling onto the grass with a triumphant yell. Brandon scooped him up, spinning him around. The sound of their laughter filled the yard, chasing away the ghosts of the past. I took a sip of my drink and leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. I thought about Vanessa sitting in her cell. I thought about Richard and Diane facing federal prosecutors. I thought about the moment I decided to pick up a hammer instead of walking away. It had been a hard 3 months. It had cost money. It had cost sleep. But looking at my family now whole and healing, I knew it was the best investment I had ever made. I opened my eyes and looked at the house. It was just wood and stone, but it stood on a foundation of truth now. "Nice hit, Leo," I called out. Brandon looked over at me and smiled. It was a real smile reaching his eyes. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." I raised my bottle in a toast. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just keep your guard up, and remember the rule." "What rule?" Leo asked, running over to get a drink of water. I smiled at my grandson. "The rule of the Ford men," I said. "We build things to last, and we don't let anyone tear them down." I took another sip, the cold liquid soothing my throat. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. It was a perfect evening. "No one touches the Ford family without paying the price," I whispered to myself. I watched them play until the stars came out. The war was over. We had won. And tomorrow we would start building again. This story reminds us that true strength isn't about control or deception, but about protecting those you love with unwavering resolve. While money and assets can be recovered, trust once shattered leaves scars that may never fully heal. It teaches us that greed is a brittle foundation for any life easily crumbled by the weight of truth. The most valuable inheritance isn't a trust fund or a house. but the integrity to do what is right, even when it's hard. Sometimes to rebuild a family, you first have to be brave enough to tear down the lies. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about justice and resilience.